Christina. I just bought a house and I need some real estate law help.
Sure, have a seat. So you're looking to rent out the house?
Yeah, I want a long-term tenant. I know I'm going to have to develop a lease, but not sure what it consists of or exactly how to make one.
Yeah, so you'll definitely need a lease. A lease is a contractual arrangement where the tenant pays the landlord regular rental payments for the use and possession of real property. The lease includes the obligations and duties of the landlord and the tenant. Creating a lease will make the rental terms enforceable.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do I start to create one?
So first there are oral leases and written leases. Oral leases create an estate from period to period, such as month to month or year to year. Since you're looking for a long-term tenant, a written lease is the best option. If the lease is longer than 1 year, then a written lease is actually required.
Great. So what do I need to know for a written lease?
First, it's important to understand the essential contract elements of a valid lease agreement. The contract must be between two competent parties, meaning both need to be of legal age, proper mental state, and not under the influence. The contract must be for legal purposes. It also has to include a property description. There must be mutual assent, meaning both parties agree to the terms of the contract. And lastly, there must be consideration, which is usually cash, but sometimes can be goods or services.
That's really important to know. Thanks. So what do I need to include into the lease?
So there are 8 key pieces of information that you need to include in the lease. First and foremost is the tenant's name. When you draft your lease, that should be the first thing you include. Next is the maximum amount of people that can occupy the space.
Okay, so here's the property description. So based on the info, how many people do you think can fit in the house?
Okay, so based on the square footage and it's a 3-bedroom and 2 bathrooms, I would say there should be a maximum of 4 people. That's about what I'd say.
Perfect, that's what I had in mind. So what comes next in this lease process?
Next, you have to come up with the term of the tenancy. So terms are typically 1 year, and you will most likely have to have a fixed term.
Fixed term?
So a fixed term is also known as a gross lease. It's for a certain amount of time with regular monthly payments. The tenant will also have to pay property taxes, insurance, special assessments, and necessary repairs. This type of term is usually used for leasing office space and residential spaces.
That all sounds perfect. Would you mind explaining all the other types of leases while you're at it?
Yeah, of course. So there's also a percentage lease. This is when rent is based on square footage of the space and the percentage of the total. There's also a net lease. This is when the tenant pays operating expenses. A triple net lease is a form of this, which includes taxes, insurance, repairs, and maintenance. Lastly, there's a ground lease. This is when the tenant has construction loan for improvements.
Oh man, I didn't realize there were this many types of leases.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after hearing all those, a fixed term lease really sounds like the best option for me.
Yeah, so the term of the tenancy is typically 1 year. Is that the length that you would like?
Perfect.
Great, so the next step is to include the dollar amount of monthly rental payments.
Okay, so haven't decided how much I want to charge. I have some numbers in mind, but do you have any advice how to determine the numbers?
Yeah, so the amount of rent that tenant or landlords usually charge the tenant should be a percentage of your home's market value. Typically, the rents that landlords charge fall between 0.8% and 1.1% of the home's value.
Okay, that should be helpful. What comes next on the lease?
So now we should go over security deposits.
Great. I don't know too much about that. Do I have to require tenants to pay one?
So landlords are not obligated to require security deposits, but I would recommend one.
Alright, I'm going to require one then. How much do I charge?
So security deposits are not to exceed more than 2 months' rent, and the payments made in advance that exceed the month's rent are considered security deposits. If your tenant is over 62 years old, then the maximum security deposit can only be up to 1 month's rent.
What happens if my tenant turns 62?
So if they turn 62 during the tenancy, then they may request a refund on any security deposits in excess of the 1 month's rent.
So otherwise, I just return the security deposit at the end of the tenancy, correct?
Yeah, so landlords are required to pay interest on tenants' funds being held as security deposits in accordance with the annual rate of interest as determined by the Connecticut Banking Commissioner.
So I now know I'm allowed to keep a portion of the security deposit if necessary. What am I able to withhold money from?
You may retain a portion of the security deposit to make necessary repairs, which are considered damages that exceed the ordinary wear and tear. If this happens, you are required to provide an itemized list of the repairs and the costs. It's also important that you return the security deposit plus the interest within 30 days after the tenant vacates the apartment.
Alright, what happens if I don't return the deposit in time?
So if you don't return it within 30 days, then the tenant may receive double the amount of the original security deposit.
Ooh, okay, that's good to know.
So next on the lease, you need to include repairs and maintenance, such as what they're responsible for and what to do in certain situations specific to the property.
Okay, I'll have to work through this section and make sure I include all the necessary information.
Great. Next, you need to decide whether you want to allow the tenant to have pets or not.
No pets. That's just an extra liability I don't have to worry about.
Yeah, that's understandable. So the last important piece of information to include on the lease is the automatic renewal. Do you want the lease to automatically renew at the end of the term unless otherwise stated by the tenant?
Yeah, I want to include that.
Okay, that's very common within leases. So that is the basic rundown of the structure of a lease. Do you have any questions about that or about renting in general?
Yeah, I was hoping you could explain the difference between a sublease and an assignment.
Sure, so an assignment is the transfer of all rights, title, and interest to the new tenant. The original tenant is off the hook, and the lease is now between the new tenant and the landlord. A sublease is between the tenant and the subtenant. The original tenant still holds the responsibility and remains liable to the landlord.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for explaining that. Another question I had was about what happens when someone breaks the lease.
Okay, that's important. So if the tenant breaks the lease, then remedies for the landlord include eviction for non-payment or stay after the lease has expired. They can also file a lawsuit for breach of lease contract. If the landlord goes against the lease, then the tenant can receive money damages or even withhold their rent.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much for all the helpful information.
You're welcome. Good luck with your renting process, and if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me.
Will do. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.